2,500 yards. That's the distance Gunnery Sergeant Carlos Hathcock's spotter called out. A range so far beyond anything a standard sniper rifle of the era could reliably reach that Hathcock didn't even consider using the M40 rifle that had already made him famous. Instead, he had his spotter mount a telescopic sight onto something the Marine Corps had never designed for precision marksmanship at all. A Browning M2 .50 caliber machine gun, bolted to a stable tripod, chambered for a round originally built to bring down aircraft and punch through light armor. Hathcock steadied the massive weapon, accounted for wind, drop, and the Coriolis effect at a distance most rifles couldn't even see a target at, and fired a single round. It struck. The shot became one of the longest confirmed sniper kills of the entire war, achieved not with a purpose-built sniper rifle at all, but with a machine gun originally designed in the years after the First World War for an entirely different job. Marines had a nickname for that weapon, one that had followed it through 3 wars by the time Hathcock ever touched a trigger in Vietnam: Deuce. To understand how a machine gun built to shoot down biplanes ended up making one of the most famous sniper shots in American military history, we have to go back to a frustrated letter John Browning wrote in 1920, complaining that his own new cartridge wouldn't behave. Nobody along that ridgeline had any idea what was about to reach them. John Browning began work on a .50 caliber machine gun in 1918, responding to an Army request for a weapon capable of penetrating the armor plating and aircraft skin that ordinary rifle-caliber machine guns couldn't touch. Progress came slowly and imperfectly. Browning himself wrote in April 1920 that work on the .50 caliber was going along rather slowly, dissatisfied with a new cartridge that kicked the gun around badly enough to ruin any hope of accuracy. Browning continued refining the design through the 1920s until his death in 1926, at which point Springfield Armory engineer Samuel Green took over development, eventually producing the weapon that would enter service, essentially unchanged in its fundamentals for the next century. The gun that emerged fired the 50 BMG round Browning machine gun, a cartridge named directly after the weapon that first chambered it, using a short recoil operating system where the barrel and bolt remained locked together at the moment of firing, before cycling back and separating to eject the spent casing. Nobody involved in that decade of frustrated development work could have predicted the gun would still be standard issue 100 years later. They just wanted it to stop kicking. Browning never lived to see what his frustrated 1920 prototype would eventually become the 50 BMG cartridge that emerged from Browning's frustrated development work carried nearly 10 times the energy of a standard rifle round, a difference that translated directly into range, penetration, and the specific kind of stopping power that made the M2 a genuinely different category of weapon, rather than simply a bigger rifle. Vehicles that could shrug off small arms fire found their engine blocks and fuel tanks vulnerable to a round designed originally to bring down aircraft, and the psychological weight of that reputation traveled with the weapon onto every platform it was eventually mounted on. A truck, a sampan, a lightly built bunker. None of it offered real protection once an M2 crew found the range, and word of that fact spread through enemy ranks faster than any training manual could have written it down. By the time American forces deployed to Vietnam, the M2 had already proven itself across 2 prior wars, and the nickname Marines and soldiers used for it, Deuce, reportedly came from a simple observation: the gun, like a mother who'd had enough, always got the last word in any argument. That reputation for absolute finality followed the weapon onto nearly every platform the American military operated in Vietnam. Twin-mounted on the bows of Navy PBR patrol boats working the Mekong Delta's canals. Mounted on tanks and armored personnel carriers as a commander's weapon, capable of engaging targets a main gun would be wasted on. Fixed to helicopter door mounts and aircraft wing hardpoints. Bolted onto ground tripods at nearly every firebase perimeter in the country. The M2 didn't have one job in Vietnam. It had every job that needed a round heavy enough to go through whatever stood in its way. That penetrating power was the specific quality that made the M2 different from every rifle-caliber weapon American infantry carried. The 50 BMG round would punch through trees, vehicle bodies, cinder block walls, and the kind of improvised cover that stopped a rifle round cold, turning positions that felt genuinely safe against small arms into no protection at all once an M2 crew found the range. Ground troops who'd learned to trust a tree line or a mud berm against AK-47 fire discovered, sometimes fatally, that the same cover meant nothing against a weapon originally built to punch through an airplane's fuselage. That reputation traveled fast through units on both sides of the war, and North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces who'd faced an M2 emplacement once rarely made the mistake of assuming distance or cover alone would keep them safe from it a second time. Every unit that touched the gun found a new job for it, and none of them were finished yet. The weapon's stability on a fixed mount, particularly the M3 tripod configuration used at static positions like firebase perimeters, gave the M2 a secondary role few outside the units that actually used it fully appreciated. Slow, deliberate, and mechanically precise, once properly sighted in a way that suited exactly the kind of patient single-shot precision fire sniping demanded. The M2 on its tripod became a genuinely effective long-range weapon at fixed installations throughout Vietnam. Snipers assigned to firebase defense pre-fired the weapon at identifiable landmarks and reference points around the perimeter, building detailed range cards that let a gunner achieve first-round accuracy against a target at a known distance, without the trial-and-error adjustment a less prepared crew would have needed. That range card discipline, unglamorous and rarely photographed, was exactly what let a shot like Hathcock's actually connect once the numbers and the moment lined up. That range card discipline was about to matter more than anyone at the base realized. Maintenance crews kept the weapon running under conditions that would have crippled a more delicate design: monsoon humidity, jungle dust, and the constant vibration of vehicle-mounted use, all testing a mechanism that had already proven itself reliable enough to serve, largely unmodified, since the late 1920s. That reliability was not an accident of good fortune. Samuel Green's refinements to Browning's original design specifically targeted the kind of field-serviceable ruggedness that let a gun crew clear a malfunction in the field with basic tools, rather than shipping the weapon back to a depot, a design philosophy that paid off directly in a theater where broken equipment sometimes meant the difference between holding a position and losing it. The Army fielded its own variant of the same basic idea for aircraft use, refurbishing surplus M2 aircraft guns with spade grips for flexible mounting as part of the M59 armament system aboard UH-1 helicopters, designated the M213, and firing at a similar 750 to 800 rounds per minute as the original aircraft configuration. That adaptation illustrated something true of the M2 across its entire service history in Vietnam and every conflict before or since. The weapon rarely needed to be redesigned for a new role. It simply needed a new mount, and Browning's original short recoil action, refined by Samuel Green and essentially unchanged since, handled whatever job got bolted around it. The mount changed. The gun underneath it never had to. This is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to dig up. The machine gun that became the sniper rifle nobody expected. If that's why you're still here, you already know what to do before the next one goes up. Hathcock's 2,500-yard shot became the specific engagement that cemented the M2's reputation as something beyond a conventional machine gun. A weapon capable of precision work at ranges that made purpose-built sniper rifles of the era look genuinely limited by comparison. The shot required accounting for factors most infantry weapons never needed to consider at all. Bullet drop measured in dozens of feet rather than inches, wind drift compounding across more than a mile of travel, and even the Coriolis effect, the Earth's own rotation subtly deflecting a projectile in flight over a distance that long. a correction normally reserved for artillery and naval gunfire rather than a rifleman's calculations. That Hathcock made the shot at all, using a machine gun bolted to a tripod rather than any rifle purpose-built for the job, said as much about the M2's inherent mechanical precision as it did about the skill of the man pulling the trigger. The numbers had to be perfect, and there would be no second shot to correct them. Gunners who trained specifically on the M2's tripod-mounted sniping role learned to treat the weapon with a discipline closer to precision marksmanship than conventional machine gun doctrine. Single well-placed rounds rather than sustained bursts, patience over volume, and a working knowledge of ballistics most machine gun crews never needed to develop. That specialized skill set rarely appeared in official training pipelines, and instead passed from experienced gunners to newer crews at the unit level, an informal apprenticeship that produced exactly the kind of expertise a shot at 2,500 yards actually demanded. Few outside the small community of Marines who'd trained that way ever fully appreciated what the gun was actually capable of in the right hands. The gun that emerged from Browning's frustrated 1920 letter about a cartridge that wouldn't behave went on to serve in every major American conflict for the following century, essentially unchanged in its fundamental mechanism, still the standard heavy machine gun in American service today. In Vietnam specifically, it did something few weapons in any war manage. It filled every role the fighting actually demanded: infantry support, vehicle armament, aircraft weapon, and, when a Marine with the patience and skill of Carlos Hathcock needed a rifle that didn't exist yet, an improvised sniper weapon capable of reaching 2,500 yards and getting, as Marines like to say about the gun that always had the last word, precisely the outcome it was aimed at.